The following program is a presentation of BaseNet Internet Television.
Hello, ViewPoint listeners. This is BaseNet Internet Television national political correspondent Tony Mizuko coming to you with episode 5 of ViewPoint. And I'm here this evening with our producer and director of programming for BaseNet Internet Television, Ed Jupin.
Hello, Tony, and welcome to our Florida primary GOP coverage.
Yeah, we are going to be going into detail with some of the numbers tonight of the Florida primary. For those of you who may not have checked the news in the last couple of days, Mitt Romney did not only win in Florida, he won handily, taking in close to a 15-point lead over Newt Gingrich. So that wasn't as much a Romney victory as a Romney destruction of Gingrich. I mean, 15 points is significant. And the fact that Romney broke the 40% mark is also very significant. We're going to go through some of the numbers just to give you an idea of how strong Romney's victory really was. He beat Gingrich virtually, if you look at the exit polls, in every single category. Now, normally you'll start to see where somebody did strong, where somebody did weak, and he literally in almost every single category destroyed Gingrich, won significantly in each one. Most importantly, I think, not only for Florida, but for California and for a potential general election against the President Obama, Romney won fairly handily among women and among Hispanics. I think that's going to be, well, we know it's a major voting bloc, but I think that that's interesting. I wonder if we've seen that there hasn't seemed to be too much fallout from Newt Gingrich's past problems with his, 2-3 wives, however many it is he has. But,
well, yeah, we saw the fallout of that now. I think it took until Florida. You didn't see that fallout in South Carolina because it was too soon. But now that we're 10 days past South Carolina,
right, and I think where you're seeing it is
some drops today.
Right, and I think where you're seeing it is these female voters, and I think that's that's very interesting, and that's going to be, again, putting your political scientist hat on, analyzing this for a potential general election, being weak among women and potentially among Hispanics. That's definitely not going to help you going into a general election, especially because the president happened to be very strong in his last election against with Hispanics and with women. So that doesn't bode well for Newt Gingrich. It bodes very, very well for Mitt Romney. And a couple other notes here. Gingrich did do better among voters who consider themselves very conservative, but Romney trumped him on voters who consider themselves moderates and somewhat liberal, which again adds to the argument that perhaps Romney's not the conservatives' number one choice. But looking at this for a general election perspective, that would signify to me that Romney has a much better chance of winning independents. And I'm going to go off on a little tangent here. I prefer the term independents as to moderates. A lot of people like to lop them together. Moderate Republicans are going to vote for, the Republican candidate by and large. A lot of moderate Democrats are going to vote for the President Obama. But independents, people who could go both ways, I wouldn't necessarily consider them moderates. I consider them true independents. But I think this is an indication that Romney is going to do very well among them in a general election if he gets the nomination. He's winning handily in the delegate count, but there's still over 1,000 delegates for him or some other candidate to get before they actually win the nomination.
Well, in the evangelical category, Gingrich 38% to Romney's 36%, so that's not a blowout. Mormon Romney only down to Gingrich by 2% with the white evangelical vote.
Right, so that the way I would interpret that is, that's still a strength to Romney. It shows that there aren't too many areas out of a whole, 100 or so different categories where he's losing handily. Right. He did worst among a few people, and not terribly, but people who consider themselves very conservative. But those very conservative voters, if it comes to
very conservative, it was extreme. Didn't Gingrich really clobber him in the very conservative?
Let me see if I can pull that up. It was probably, I think it was 24 to 11 or 10. I mean, it was enough that I made a note of it. But I think that the important thing is those very conservative voters in a general election, they're going to go for Mitt Romney over Barack Obama. There's always the argument as to how energized they're going to be. I think whoever the Republican nominee has the advantage that the base is going to be somewhat energized to vote against Obama as opposed to just for Mitt Romney. Obviously, if you can have a double whammy, if they can be energized to vote for you and against another candidate, that's great. But I think that somebody who's very conservative, who may not think that Mitt Romney's conservative enough, come November 4th, it comes down to Obama or Romney. They're going to go for Romney. They're going to get up and they're going to go out and vote.
Women, 52% for Romney.
Yeah, I think that's pretty, I would say that is, I'm going to pull up the exit polls now. That's pretty handy. I mean, he significantly won compared to Gingrich. So, I mean, you've got to look at it that's a significant voting block, and Romney is just, he's very strong in all of these categories. The age categories, interestingly enough, if you look at those, Romney, fairly consistent. He did do slightly better among older voters, but Gingrich did as well. Ron Paul, obviously, interestingly enough, had higher support among younger voters and very, very low support among older voters.
No surprises there. Well, no, I don't see with Ron Paul, I don't see that. I think Ron Paul is another Howard Dean where he is attracting the younger voters.
Right. I should say it's not surprising, but still interests me that his numbers were so low.
That he doesn't get it from the older voters, people his own age, yeah.
Right, and that's what's interesting. Howard Dean was a little bit younger. I mean, Ron Paul is, an old guy. He does come off as a grandpa, and his numbers weren't too spectacular anywhere along the board. But I think that he's going to stick it in. I guess I'll move on to the next topic. Looking at these numbers, Romney won resoundingly, and he won not just the total vote, but he won almost every category you look at. Romney was able to beat Gingrich, I have it right here. 51 to 28% married women, Romney versus Gingrich. With married women, that is a pretty handy win there. Although one more thing I'll mention, in terms of 2011 total income, people making $200,000 or more went for Romney over Gingrich almost 3 times, which is interesting.
I believe in all of the caucuses or primaries so far that's been the case, though. The upper echelon has gone for him in all 4 so far.
Right, 3 to 1 is fairly significant, though. And I found those numbers we were referencing earlier. It was Gingrich beat Romney by 12% on individuals considering themselves very conservative, and depending on how you worded the question, it dropped to 8 or to 10 or 12%, but about 12%. So that shows that the base of the party is still unsure about Mitt Romney. But my own opinion here, and this is viewpoint sometimes about opinion, sometimes about facts. My prediction, if you will, not going to hurt Romney in the long run because he's still winning by such big numbers.
You gave your perfect example was the independents or rather the conservative wing. The conservatives in a general election are not going to vote for Obama, as you said. Obviously, they're going to vote for Romney.
Exactly. If this was if the country was doing a little bit better, if Obama wasn't such a divisive character to individuals on the right, I think you might see the effect of some of those very conservative voters staying home. I don't think that's going to happen this time.
No, they want Obama out. So
right. Just as Obama's base is not as energized as it was 4 years ago, and I think what you're going to see is, yes, there are people who are very liberal, your far left progressives. Are they going to vote for President Obama? Of course. They're not going to come out and vote for Mitt Romney, as much as I would love that to happen. But what you're going to see is more of them might stay home. And, they're not going to stay home. They're not going to go to as many events. They might not give as much money. They might not organize as much. And that could be something, too. It's not just the people getting out to vote. It's, hey, 4 years ago, I organized my precinct for Obama, and I got us a nice high voter turnout. And people might just say, I don't want to do it this time. His base is not going to be as energized. And with a candidate like Mitt Romney, unfortunately, they're not going to be as energized to want to beat him. I mean, they're going to try to paint him as Mr. Wall Street and this and that. But Mitt Romney is kind of the Teflon Don. He is very hard to hate. So I don't think that they're going to be able to have that same angst towards Mitt Romney as Republicans will towards Obama. The future will have to tell. The convention is not until, I believe, August.
Late August, yeah.
Yeah, I think there's still over 1,000 delegates to be had. As for anyone dropping out after Florida, I don't think it's going to happen, and I'll tell you why. It's too soon for Gingrich to drop out because people were saying maybe after New Hampshire Gingrich would drop, and he didn't. He stuck it in and he won South Carolina, and he's still riding that South Carolina high. He's still the second front runner, if you will.
Well, I saw some statistics that if you project numbers, delegate counts, through around June or July, a month or two before the convention, and if you just separate the delegates north and south, give the south to Gingrich, give the north to Romney, they're only give or take a couple hundred, 150 to 200 delegate counts between the two of them then. All the way into July, projected ahead, if you do a true north-south separation. So by Gingrich staying in, with those projections, come July, he's still right in the ball game.
Right, absolutely. It's still anyone's game. And I'm going to go through briefly. I mean, that's why I think Gingrich is going to stay in. He did well enough in South Carolina. If he'd gotten 4% of the vote in Florida, sure, he'd probably tech out, but he got enough to stay in there. Santorum didn't really compete in Florida, so he's focusing his energy elsewhere to try to pick up more delegates and go to the convention with that.
As is Ron Paul.
Ron Paul is not going to leave. I think this is my my viewpoint prediction. Ron Paul is a principled individual. He sticks to his guns, as we always say about him. I think he's going to stay in the race, get as many delegates as he can possibly get, and come convention time, he's going to use that to either cause a problem, a good problem in my opinion, or he's going to try to force the party to take some sort of an issue that he agrees with, whether it's auditing the Fed, whether it's, establishing a gold standard. I mean, gold standard committee or something like that. They wouldn't be able to just enact something like that. But I think Ron Paul's going to hold out, and he's going to say at the end of it, hey, maybe I only have 20% of the delegates, but I represent the youth, I represent possibly the future of our party, and 20% of the people want this done before I agree to go along with candidate A. Because I'll tell you another thing, if the convention rolls around and Ron Paul's not happy with the platform or what whether it's Romney or Gingrich or Santorum or whoever the nominee is, I don't think he's going to run as a third-party candidate, but he might turn around and tell people to vote for some other third-party candidate, to not vote for the two candidates. I mean, I think Ron Paul could have enough of an impact on Republican voters to cause them to lose the election. Because, again, nobody is going to win this election, whether it's the Republican nominee or whether it's President Obama. I don't think anyone's going to win this election, barring some gigantic October surprise. Nobody's going to win this handily. This is not, if you look at Reagan and actually Nixon's, both of their re-election campaigns in 2 or 74 and 1984, they won handily. I mean, all the states, plus except, Massachusetts and D.C., you're not going to have a victory like that one way or the other. Barack Obama is not going to win handily like that. The Republican nominee is not going to win handily like that. So what that means is that somebody like Ron Paul, or somebody on the left, I don't think they're going to jeopardize their chances, coming out and saying, don't vote for this nominee, that could swing the election. Yes, it's only 5 or 6%, but it could be 5 or 6% that's going to move the election one way or the other. So I think that's something they definitely need to worry about. That being said, I think all candidates are still going to stay in, but I want to move this into a discussion about the Florida results in relation to the convention and why everyone seems to be worried about a brokered convention and what that means. Years ago, the parties literally would be nominating the candidate on the floor of the convention. And I mean, if you could imagine that, going into a convention, not having really any idea who your party's nominee was going to be. Of course, now we like everything to be set ahead of time. We need to raise our money and get our ads made. And, the media, I think, is vicious and voracious in trying to get as much information as they can because they need to know who the nominee is so they can start their end and start running their businesses. Taking a step back from this, whether you like the politics or whether you don't like the politics, whether you like the field or you don't like the field, for me, the prospect that this could go into August, that we could really see a drag-out fight for the nominee of the president, for the nominee of the Republican Party, I think that's a good thing. It's good for the party, and it's good for the country, and it's good for the election. We shouldn't have elections where 5 people throw their name in the hat, almost right away who the nominee is going to be, they become the nominee, and then there's election, and you pretty much know how it's going to go. I'm sure the media likes that. I'm sure the vested interest in Washington, I'm sure the politicians like that. They like that certainty. But when democracy is concerned, I think you need to sort of take away that certainty factor. From a political theater perspective, and I know, Ed, you and I have talked about how with the Super Bowl coming up that, this presidential election is sort of our Super Bowl if you're into politics. And I think that's absolutely the truth, but it plays out in a very theatrical way, and I think it's good for the country. We should have very different opinions. If we go back to the founding of the country, if we go back to the debates on the Declaration, the debates years later on the Constitution, they weren't, quiet, simple little debates where some, fat old white men sat around the table and just jolly.
The Lincoln-Douglas debates.
Right. Well, yeah, you go back to the Lincoln-Douglas debates. I mean, these are heated political debate is something that's part of our political culture in this country. It's part of our history, and that's a good thing. And you know what? A knockdown, drag-out fight, which everyone seems to say they want to avoid, I think that's a good thing. I think that's a great thing, and it helps the parties, it helps the candidates, and it helps the countries. If it goes to some sort of a brokered convention, if there's some backroom deals being made and, Mitt Romney's on his knees begging for Ron Paul support or, there's some black horse that rides in, I think that's great. It's good for our country. I'm willing to put the potential short-term benefit for my own party and my own political ambitions and views on something aside for something that I think is good for our democracy and it's good for our republic. I think that, again, we get into this attitude that, politics should be cleaner, and obviously we don't want dirty politicians, we don't want corruption, but when you're talking about a political race, there should be a little bit of mudslinging. Yes,
And
we
of
want to
course, we
focus
don't
on.
even know the vice presidential candidate on the ticket either yet.
Yeah,
And
aside.
and for some people, that could make or break the deal.
Absolutely. I mean, Ron Paul might want to put somebody up as a vice presidential candidate, and that could be something that he brokers with. Gingrich could be the same thing. Santorum, I originally did not necessarily think Santorum was interested in being vice president, but the more I look at it, it might be. And here's the interesting scenario relating to that. Hypothetically, you get to convention time. Romney is maybe the winner, or maybe he's not. Maybe he doesn't have, what is it, 1144 delegates, I think he
Yeah.
need. He doesn't have that number. He needs some delegates. You sit in a back room and you've got Romney, the base, who's almost won it, and you've got the conservatives who are going to say, hey, we're not okay with you. We need you to do something to placate us, to
Sure.
placate to our end of the party. And maybe that is a Santorum. Could he pick Gingrich? I don't really think it's going to happen.
I don't think so. I see the senator from Florida, perhaps.
Marco Rubio. So my concern with that is I almost wonder if it's similar to McCain's picking Sarah Palin. And a lot of people, when they don't like Sarah Palin, I don't want to get into it because a lot of them are wrong.
Too much of an unknown or inexperience with Rubio?
Exactly, and I think that's what it is. Are you going for who's hot now? Because Rubio was elected in the sort of the Tea Party swing
Yep.
last year, the year before, and I think from a party perspective, he can benefit the right much more by staying a senator for the next 5 years, 4 years, whatever it is, as opposed to possibly running for vice president and then losing. Although if he runs for vice president, if he gets picked as a nominee and he loses, he's got enough time before his next Senate reelection for everyone to forget that he tried to dump Florida after 2 years. We say that sometimes the vice presidential pick doesn't have that big of an impact, and to an extent, I don't think it does, but I think maybe Romney would pick somebody like Rubio, hoping it would have a bigger impact than it really would. Hispanics would like to see him in the White House. He's young. He's very popular. He would placate the Tea Party and the base of the party, but I don't know how strong of a candidate he would be overall as a vice president. Joe Biden's probably not that difficult to debate against, so I'm sure he'd do fine in that respect. Rubio could really go into some of these Hispanic communities and start, getting them behind Romney. And here's another interesting dynamic. I read an article recently, since we're talking about Rubio, because the federal government has mandated that Catholic churches and their health insurance provision allow for contraceptives to be covered by the insurance. A lot of the Catholic organizations in the country are very, very upset with the Obama administration, and even some Catholics who are, very far left or very, left-leaning Democrats have said that the president is really, really, hurting his Catholic Democratic allies by doing that. A lot of Hispanic families in Florida and in Southern California and in Mexico, in Mexico, they're probably going to vote in the election anyway. Arizona, Mexico, that area, Texas. A lot of them are very socially conservative, far more so than you would think for the fact that they tend to vote for Democrats, which is true of a lot of blacks in this country, which is always a very interesting dynamic. But a lot of them happen to be Catholics, especially in Southern California, which Romney's not going to win no matter what. But in Florida and a lot of other places where you have heavy Catholic populations, they're very, very Catholic. I hope nobody's offended by me saying that they're very, very Catholic. I think it's the truth of the matter. Rubio going in and those Hispanics being willing to give him a listen because he's Hispanic, and also the fact that from a Catholic perspective, they might not like the Obama decision. Because remember, California, as liberal as it is, did vote. They had that Prop 8 with the gay marriage, and there were a lot of Hispanics voting against allowing gay marriage in California. I believe they voted to put it in the Constitution, and then the Supreme Court of California.
As did they vote on the legalization of marijuana, and everybody thought that was going to be a sure win in California.
Exactly. So you could see a really interesting dynamic there possibly happening and playing out where a lot of these Hispanics who, they may have voted for Democrats and they may always vote for Democrats. Some of them might start saying, hey, you know what? We like this Marco Rubio guy. Hey, the president's he's not a Catholic. He doesn't agree with us. It's a very interesting dynamic. People don't like things like that in politics. I love things like that in politics because it mixes it up. It makes the politicians worry. Our politicians should be worried. They should be worried about catering to their base and catering to do this. I mean, that's how you build character in an individual, is making them have to deal with a lot of challenges and a lot of stresses. And I know sometimes they're trying to cater to too much, but again, Marco Rubio could have that big of an impact. Hispanics otherwise might have a different, might have that kind of an impact. Mitt Romney mentioned recently that his father was born in Mexico, and he doesn't talk about that very much. And the supposed backstory is that his grandfather or great-grandfather was a polygamist or something like that. And whether or not that'll have a real big impact, I don't think so. But even the fact that he was born to American parents in Mexico, a lot of Hispanics are going to probably look at that and say, he has a degree of authenticity Given that his father was born in Mexico. I mean, he could definitely really, by picking Rubio, hit the Hispanic vote hard. But the big but is the economy is still going to be number one in this the number one issue facing the country. And a lot of people out there, probably more so than the Hispanic vote in the country, are probably going to be voting on whether or not, they think the economy is going in the right direction, whether it's gone in the wrong direction. Of course, Iran, which I'm getting tired of talking about here on BaseNet because it seems like every couple of weeks, this situation with Iran just keeps going. A lot of people are worried that we're moving towards war with Iran, and that could end up overtaking the economy as an issue. That could end up overtaking, Hispanics wanting to go for Rubio because he's Hispanic and allying with the Catholic Church and Catholic voters against Obama's government requiring, or the federal government, I should say, I don't want to blame it entirely on Obama, requiring the Catholic organizations to have their health plans provide for contraceptives. So there's a lot of unknowns here, and it's really, as much as polls can take you, you can go too far, you can go too much, and there's just too many unknowns, and you've got to just follow the road as we go.
Now, Romney, again tonight in his acceptance speech, he reiterated again the fact that he's for incredibly powerful military, whereas Obama is currently downsizing the military down to nothing.
I think here's the funny thing about that. The military is getting cut huge. And I'll give people a brief little lesson here. Ed, you'll probably remember a lot of this, but a lot of the main battle systems that the military uses, and the big things that we have, the M1A1 tank, I think they're the rifle that the military uses, the F-18s and the Los Angeles.
Oh, I'm glad you're asking me if I remember that, and you're not asking me if I remember the Monitor and a Merrimack. So okay, good, thank you. Jeez.
But a lot of these systems, even the Stealth Fighter, a lot of these systems that we know that are the mainstay of our arms, of our armory, and the mainstay of the military. These systems were used 20 years ago in Gulf War. They were designed and developed in the 70s and the 80s. The military needs an overhaul. This is a point in time where we need to be expanding and investing more in our hardware. And again, regardless of the geopolitical consequences and whether we should spend more on guns versus butter, the point I'm making is these systems that we all heard about how amazing they were in the Gulf War in 1991. These are old systems. Now, they have long lifespans, but 20, 30 years, at some point, you've got to completely re-engineer a system. I mean, the bulk of the United States submarine fleet is Los Angeles-class submarines that, they were originally designed 15, 20 years ago. If anyone's seen The Hunt for Red October, okay, phenomenal movie, by the way, full ViewPoint endorsement of The Hunt for Red October, but the submarines that were used in that movie, which was filmed in the 80s, I believe 89 was it, or 84?
Yeah, somewhere in the 80s.
Those are still the bulk of the U.S. submarine fleet. Tomahawk missiles are 20 years old at this point, and yes, you upgrade systems and you redesign them and you rebuild them, but a lot of these systems are at a point where we need to replace them. A lot of the aircraft carrier fleet is is getting older, and even though aircraft carriers have 50, 60-year lifespans. But here's another thing. I remember 10 or 15 years ago in the Clinton years, everyone was talking about how the idea of a Navy approaching 300 ships was terrible and we wouldn't be able to defend ourselves. We're below 300 ships. We've dropped below a 300-ship Navy. So regardless of the guns versus butter argument, the military is at a point where it does need to reinvest. You can't really, and I'll give Ron Paul credit on this, I guess, because he said we need to separate. I believe he phrased it as defense spending and military spending, and he was making his analogy to the war in Iraq and in Afghanistan and how much we're spending on that, and that's not really security spending. That's just military spending, and that security spending is investing in these systems. But to go back to the point, not only do we need to invest in the military, Obama's cutting it dramatically. And there have been no major cuts to Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. The entitlements that are strangling the country aren't happening or are not getting significantly cut, but they want to cut the military. If you were to cut the military in line with everything else, that would be understandable. But just chopping hundreds of billions of dollars off the military budget over the next 10 years is not going to solve any of our problems. And I think that could potentially end up hurting Obama come election. I think a lot of veterans are probably going to, or veterans or active duty military are going to start to see the impact of some of those cuts, and they're going to start to say that, what, we don't want Barack Obama. We don't like the way this is going. This is not the appropriate way to, trim the defense budget. Without getting too much of a debate over, specifically how you would do that, I think that's something that, is going to end up hurting the president in the long run.
So how about some of these caucuses coming up now? We have Nevada caucus coming up on Saturday. which is like the 2nd or the 3rd, whatever it is, of February. And then I believe it's the following Tuesday, around the 7th of February, there's like 3 more caucuses. And Ron Paul is specifically going after all of those because he feels he's got his best shot in caucus states.
Yeah, I think he absolutely does, because you got to remember some of the earlier caucuses and straw polls, Ron Paul won. He actually won, I believe, a straw poll in California 6 or 7 months ago. I think I mentioned that before. I think that you're going to see, I don't want to say Romney is definitely going to be the nominee. I don't think Romney is going to lose his spot as the presumptive frontrunner. He may lose a few of these races individually, but I think what you're going to see is Romney maintaining where he is, and really Gingrich, Santorum, and Paul picking up and winning individually in some of these races. And winning may not mean winning outright. It might mean that all of a sudden they're second, or even they're a strong third in these races. As for the specifics, it's very tough to tell. It's still very fluid. Remember, Santorum didn't really focus on Florida, and Ron Paul didn't really focus on Florida either. They sort of just...
No, because that was a winner-takes-all state. So
right,
they knew that they couldn't win, so they couldn't even pick up one delegate. So why bother? Why waste the money?
It makes perfect sense. I think that's why. And, you know, in light of that, you could say they still did well, given the fact that they didn't try, that they still have their core group of support. I see Gingrich's numbers potentially as being the most volatile. And I think you've seen that over the last few weeks, but I think there's more that could come out against Gingrich. I think he's getting into angry badger mode, which doesn't help his persona and doesn't help his campaign. He's the one who early on in the debates was calling for unity among the Republicans and not attacking them, and then launches really nasty attacks himself, which it's politics. People have to respond to that, and they have to do what they have to do. I think Gingrich's numbers are going to go up and down, but I think he's probably on a long decline because, again, he did win South Carolina. He did get trumped in Florida. Probably will do well in Nevada. I know he's put effort into Nevada. I know it's a state that's very hard hit by foreclosures, but, you know, it all really depends on how it gets played out in Nevada, whether or not Romney tries to play up Gingrich's Fannie and Freddie Mac experience or whatever.
But Nevada also has a very high Mormon population, being in such close proximity to Utah and all.
Right. So, I mean, Nevada's one of those states where, you know, you've got Las Vegas that has, I don't know, 1 million people. Or
I think Gingrich's only hope is Louisiana and, you know, all of the other true southern states. And
right,
it's
just
not going to be enough there.
Right. I don't think there's enough there either. And I think that with Nevada coming up next, if the southern states were all tomorrow, Gingrich would be in a much different position, but they're not. And I think he's only going to slide to a decline. Interestingly enough, South Carolina, despite being a conservative state, traditionally usually picks a more moderate candidate in the primaries, or at least the perceived more moderate candidate. But they went with Gingrich over Romney this time. But he's also from Georgia. And if you looked at the counties where Gingrich won in Florida, all primarily in the north, a little bit in the south center, but the part of Florida that is still the south, because once you get, well past Orlando, it's not really the south anymore. At least, let me rephrase that. When you grow up in New England, in the Boston area particularly, no offense, Ed, but the South starts in New Jersey. Okay? And I'd even question that whether or not it really starts in Connecticut. But
a funny enough story along that, a little anecdotal note here. When I lived in the Poconos in Pennsylvania, where Fred Boaz, the host of our show As We See It, currently lives, the township that I lived in Pennsylvania was a Southern sympathizer during the Civil War. That's
pretty interesting. Again, from Massachusetts, we consider Connecticut the South, but whatever. Mm-hmm. I think we also consider Canada anything west of Worcester or Springfield. But moving on, so you're right. But the parts of Florida that are more or less the South, as opposed to the New Florida, whatever you want to call it, went for Gingrich. Romney won Miami-Dade fairly handily, and that's very interesting. But I think it goes to show the point that Gingrich will be strong in the South. He will do well in the South. There's not enough delegates in those southern primaries. There's not enough delegates to make a big difference, I think, for Gingrich. And it depends on balancing them and when they are, and whether they're winner.
Well, but don't forget what they say about Florida too. The further north you go in Florida, the further south you're actually going.
Right,
because southern Florida is Northerners. But right. Northern Florida is your true Southerners.
Right, and that's why again it's a very interesting map. I'm actually going to see if I can pull it up here while we're recording. But if you look at the counties that were won by Gingrich, they were primarily all in the north and then a little in the south center. But it's again, it's a very
So he won the true Southern vote.
right. But I don't think that that's really going to carry through any further. California, which I think is not scheduled till June, maybe, if I'm correct. I think the California
I think so.
primary is June 5th or so. Has over 100 delegates up, and by that point, if they're all still in the race, I don't necessarily think they will be, believe me, but that will be a crown for Romney because I think he's going to win California over Gingrich. I do not think that Gingrich could pull off, if they're both still going neck and neck, a win in California. So that might be Romney. You know, everyone said that New Hampshire was his firewall. It might be that, you know, California, and there's a couple other primaries that they are really his firewall, where he clears up enough delegates to win, because I think more than 10% of the total is in California on that date. And again, I think that the Simi Valley Republicans and the Orange County Republicans, they're Mitt Romney's people, hand over fist. You know, if you've ever driven through Southern, I know Ed, you used to live in California. If you've ever driven through Southern California and you're driving through, you know, Huntington Beach and Newport Beach and all that, they're going to be Mitt Romney Republicans, not Newt Gingrich Republicans by far. So, you know, it's going to be interesting to see. I don't think Gingrich's South is going to work. I think in a general election, Gingrich would do all right and he would win the South handily, as a Republican generally would in this current climate. But I don't think that there's really going to be a big Gingrich bump per se, and I don't think that his strength in the South is really going to help him. Again, Nevada, if it turns out that it's another Romney Trump, more and more people are going to say, well, you know, Romney's doing real well. Romney keeps winning. And remember, that's what I said before. I know a couple of weeks ago we had a discussion as to whether or not Romney, he can't seem to get past this 20-30% mark he's at. Well, he just won with 46% in Florida. So he's above that mark. And I'll give myself credit here, I somewhat predicted that as more candidates dropped out, you'd see more gravitation one way or the other. And he just won Florida with 46%. So now he's got second place, tie, whatever you want to call it, in Iowa, a win in New Hampshire, now a win in Florida.
I think Florida was just huge. If there was going to be a turning point in this race, it was just Florida.
I'd be willing to go with that because, again, 46-32, that's a decisive win. If it had been, you know, 35, 34,
and it's still the South. I mean, you know, I don't care about this saying the further north you go in Florida, the further south you're going. You know, it's a southern state. Florida is still Florida, and Gingrich got trounced.
Right. In Miami-Dade County, 61% to 26% Romney beat Gingrich. That's massive.
And that's not all Northerners living in Miami-Dade County.
Right.
I got news for you.
Some of the northern counties in Florida, you know, Romney did lose fairly handily to Gingrich by, you know, 20-30%, but some of them were only, you know, 8 or 10%. And again, you could play with the numbers any way you want, but
then he lost those 4 years ago to McCain as well.
Right. You know what I mean? Miami-Dade is big, especially, again, how much he won it by. And even Palm Beach was another big county in southern Florida. He won handily. Broward County, again, and these are very Hispanic, have a high percentage of Hispanics. He won by 20 points. I mean, he really did trump Gingrich. Gingrich pulled a third of the vote. Good for him. But I really don't think that, I don't think it's going to matter. And where Santorum's voters are going to go if he were to drop, you know, some are going to go to Romney, some are going to go to Newt.
Yeah, okay, so you're splitting it, even if you split it.
Right, some to Ron Paul, but they're not going to all jump right on Gingrich. No. Ron Paul's voters sure as hell aren't going to go for Newt Gingrich. No. They're probably just going to be left out of the equation to an extent. So a
certain amount might actually even vote for Obama in the general election.
Exactly, I wouldn't put that past them. So again, I am not willing to put the nail in the coffin for Gingrich yet, but you know they've selected the pine that they're gonna use for. It's a tough loss somewhere he should have won. Nevada could be, you know, another breaking point in the sense that Nevada's never important, but if Romney pulls out a big win in Nevada, again, 15-20%, it's, well, now wait a minute, Gingrich, you can't seem to get past that 15 to 10%. So Nevada comes up in a couple of days. After that, what we're looking at, there's Maine thrown in the middle there, but, you know, there's just some guys up there with rakes.
Which you're saying might actually be Ron Paul.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. But then on February 7th, you've got Colorado, Minnesota, and Missouri. And a couple weeks after that, before Super Tuesday, you then have Arizona and Michigan. But Colorado, Minnesota, and Missouri, are they going to be big Gingrich states? Missouri, possibly. Minnesota, they're more likely to go for Romney. And I think Colorado's more likely to go for Romney, too. I think Romney appeals more to people in the West.
Yeah.
Minnesota, I'm not going to say because it's close to Michigan that it'll that they'll like Romney because his father was governor of Michigan, but it's Minnesota. I think that they're possibly more likely to go for Romney. And then March 3rd, I think, well, then you're coming up on Arizona and Michigan. Michigan, Romney is going to win handily. I'm very, very convinced of that. Arizona could go both ways. John McCain really didn't survive his last election attempt that well. But again, I think they're a little bit more moderate. I think, well, I shouldn't say that. Barry Goldwater came out of Arizona. But Newt Gingrich, as much as I love him, is nowhere in the same league as Barry Goldwater. What are a lot of retirees in Florida, in Arizona as well, going to go for? I think they're going to go for Romney, just like they did in Florida. And then we're coming up to Super Tuesday, a little over a month away, and I know I'm jumping up here, but listen to the lineup on Super Tuesday. Alaska, Georgia, Idaho, Massachusetts, North Dakota, Ohio, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Vermont, and Virginia. Spread out all over the country. A couple of Gingrich wins are possible.
And since you mentioned Virginia, remember Gingrich won't be on the ballot in Virginia.
That's right. So Virginia, which would have been potentially one of his wins, is not going to be. So out of Virginia, Tennessee, and Georgia, which make up the states in the South for the Super Tuesday, he already can't win one of them. He's going to win Georgia handily, but that's his home state. Again, Ohio, Oklahoma. Oklahoma, I would say Romney will probably win handily. Who knows which way Vermont's going to go? Who knows which way Alaska's going to go? Massachusetts, I don't know if Romney will win Massachusetts. He's not very popular among Democrats here. And in Massachusetts, you can vote in either primary, which is a terrible system. I remember 4 years ago, a friend of mine actually, who's a very progressive liberal or progressive Democrat, going and voting in the Republican primary just so Romney wouldn't win, because he was not popular among the liberals here in Massachusetts. Which good for him. He did what he.
Well, so then you see what? You see Gingrich winning Massachusetts?
No,
I don't see that.
I just don't think it's going to
happen. I think Romney's got it wrapped up.
Yeah, I mean, he probably does. Massachusetts is by and far an establishment Republican state. I don't even know why there are Republicans in this state sometimes, so they're going to go for Romney. But you might see a 3, 4, 5% kick that you wouldn't otherwise expect just because people aren't happy with Romney. But here's a little interesting factoid. I wouldn't be surprised if Ron Paul picked up a few more points in Massachusetts than he would in some of these other states because you've got so many college kids in the Boston area.
Well, and let's just say theoretically in 2 weeks he does win Maine, and some people, like I just said in passing, there are some people predicting that Maine could go to Ron Paul. If he picks up Maine, why wouldn't he possibly be strong in Massachusetts?
He very well could be. Maine is a very interesting state politically. They're one of the few states that, they tend to go Republican, but they don't always. Their governor tends to switch back and forth. They've elected independent governors. Maine is they go their own way. And I guess I'll give them credit for that. If you're from somewhere else in the world or somewhere else in the country, you've never really been to Maine, you're not missing much. But I'll give them credit for, I hope Basin doesn't get sued for me, bashing half of the states in the country. But I grew up in Boston and have lived here my whole life. And, the nickname that the media often gives Boston is the hub. And what a lot of people don't realize is it stands for the hub of the universe, just to give you an idea of our mentality from here in eastern Massachusetts. Maine's one of those states that could go for Ron Paul, not just because they're looking like it might, but because they tend to do things on their own. They tend to be a little bit independent. That would be a game changer in a sense that you'd get a few of those, lukewarm Ron Paul supporters who might say, hey, he won, I'm going to go with it. But you bring up an interesting point about Massachusetts. If he wins in Maine, you could see a lot of anger in Massachusetts where maybe people just don't want Mitt Romney. He was popular among Republicans here.
Yep.
But you got to remember that, with Scott Brown getting elected recently, there was some pushback in Massachusetts. And I'll give everyone a little electoral history. Consistently in the last several presidential elections, the Republican has garnered about 33% of the vote in Massachusetts. Statistically, it's roughly right around that. So when you look at it that way, really you've got to win 18% of the vote in Massachusetts, which is possible. Now, is Romney going to get that 33%? Who knows? I think that Ron Paul potentially would he's got good potential in Maine, and he could pick up a little bit higher in Massachusetts than you'd think he would. If Ron Paul's third and fourth in most of these other states, I wouldn't be surprised if he came in second in Massachusetts. Now, the Democrats aren't as organized as they are, as the Republicans are with talk radio, for instance. So if everyone remembers Rush Limbaugh's Operation Chaos last election cycle, could the Democrats try to do something like that in Massachusetts to, keep the race going or whatnot? I don't really think it's going to make a difference. If Ron Paul won Massachusetts outright, which I don't think is going to happen, then that might be a game changer. But Vermont also, I wouldn't be surprised if they went for Ron Paul, because Vermont is another fascinating state in our country where
Howard Dean,
very, very liberal, very, very progressive, but they have the loosest gun laws in the country in Vermont, and a lot of people don't realize that. I mean, they're a very unique, independent state in their own mind. Bunch of weirdos, if you ask me. But again, I'm partial to Massachusetts.
There's another one on your list.
Yeah, exactly. How many more states? I think that, Gingrich is not going to do well. Virginia really, really hurt him. I think him not being there, Virginia is more likely to go establishment and go for Romney. Now, you've got, let's see, I think it's 10 states on Super Tuesday. What happens if Romney wins 8 of them? It's over. It's done with. The rest of the candidates will stick in till the end of March because there's about another half dozen primaries. The exception being Ron Paul, who I'm convinced at this point is going to stick it all the way out. And that's another interesting thing. If Gingrich and Santorum start dropping out after Super Tuesday, and Ron Paul is committed to staying till the end, what happens on June 5th when you've got California, Montana, New Jersey, New Mexico, and South Dakota, when all of a sudden it's a choice between, and I'm not sure which one of those a winner takes all or which ones aren't, or if any of them are, but all of a sudden it's just Romney and just Paul, and I'd be interested to see how that dynamic works. And again, it's all coming up to the convention where Ron Paul or somebody might be able to sort of sue for what they want to get out of it. Real quick, just so everyone knows, June 26th is the Utah primary. I'm going to call that one for Mitt Romney right now. Just going to put it out there. Mitt Romney will win handily the Utah primary.
Well, you know what I'm starting to think? I'm starting to agree with Rick Santorum saying, I'm really tired of hearing about all of this, and I think the Republicans need to, no, I'm not, for this conversation's sake, I'm not endorsing a Republican candidate. I'm just throwing it out there. The Republicans need to not worry about any of this anymore and just concentrate on beating President Obama.
Right.
And, like Santorum said that back in the South Carolina debate, or one of the many South Carolina debates. Let's just end this and let's just concentrate on the president at this point and beating him.
I agree, and it's the inherent nature of politics that Romney and Gingrich started going at it. But Santorum, he brought up a good point, and I think it was the last South Carolina debate where he said, hey, Newt used his skills as a legislator or whatever to make some money in the private sector. Mitt Romney ran a bunch of companies. Nobody's perfect, but there's nothing inherently wrong with that either. Let's move on and talk about the issues.
That's right.
And, you might see that. I don't, Gingrich is still the angry badger, so to speak. I don't want to say he's the one that's causing a lot of the negativity in the race. I think, again, these people are competing with each other. But you might start to see, now that you're going everywhere, that you can't play to one audience in one state. You might start to see that happen where everyone starts to talk about, here's why Obama is wrong and here's why we're right. Because, again, with something like a South Carolina or New Hampshire or an Iowa, you can focus in on an issue. You can focus in on an area. But now you're sort of, buckshot all over the place, that you've really got to make it about Obama and how you're the best to beat him and why you should get selected over him, even though you're competing with your other Republicans. But interesting note, Missouri, which is holding its primary on February 7th, its delegates are not being counted until its caucus in March 17th. So that could further hurt Gingrich, because a win in Missouri, again, is not going to be a delegate win, and he's likely to win. I wouldn't put winning Missouri past him. It's in the South. But the delegate counts.
Yeah, you're not awarded the delegates immediately.
Right. So you're going to start seeing graphics on TV, and it's going to show Mitt Romney with 220 and Gingrich at 25 or whatever it happens to be. He's already at 26, so it'd be higher than that.
There's another state like that, or at least one other state like that I believe is also down south. It might even be Tennessee is similar to that.
I'll have to check in on that. It started 4 years ago, but a lot of states have started screwing themselves because they want to get in earlier because they know that there's money involved in it and there's attention on their state and all that.
Yeah, and we should mention to the political novices out here, it's because when they moved up their primary date that this happened.
Right, they moved it up to for that benefit, and the parties started, and it's happened with the Democrats as well, have started taking away the delegates. Right. Flashback to 2008, Hillary, I believe Florida and Michigan didn't count because they moved their primaries up.
Correct.
And Obama wasn't on the ballot in one of them because they, officially weren't supposed to be, and they weren't really supposed to campaign in Michigan. But I believe a lot of people crunched the numbers, and if those two states had been in play, Hillary would have won the nomination, because she did win handily in one of the states where, again, Obama wasn't really on the ballot, I think, and the other one, I think, was Michigan, where she won pretty handily. So it's very interesting that these states are trying to make a economic decision or a calculation, if you will, that ends up really impacting how the party votes and who they select as the candidate. So it'll be very interesting to see what that happens. Part of me almost wishes that all the caucuses or primaries were just on one day for the party, and then you just duke it out at a week-long convention and come up with a solution. But again, I tend to get a little bored and just want everything to be exciting and right in front of my face. But that would really be like a Super Bowl. But as for what's coming up, and we've already covered Nevada, we've already covered what's going on with that. In terms of turning the race to the president, brief discussion on that. The economy is still not doing well. They've released recent growth rates. They've released there's articles out there about how unemployment appears to be higher than it is. More of these green companies that the president invested in are starting to fail. I mean, first it was Cylinder. Now there have been a couple other companies. The debt ceiling is creeping up again. I believe we're about to hit it again, so that's going to need to open. I don't think it'll be as big of a battle this time. I could be wrong. I may eat my words. So the economy is not any better. The Republicans are going to focus on the economy. The president, I think, is going to try to focus on foreign policy where he has, and it pains me to say this, he has had some successes, but I don't think that's enough to help the president. I don't think that, he's going to try to play up the killing of Osama bin Laden. But the problem is the people who really look at that as a tearjerker are the people who really, really...
Well, did you see just the other day Biden said that he wasn't for that?
Yeah, Joe Biden's an idiot.
Now, this opens up this whole discussion. I've been talking about it with people the past few days since I don't want to say he put his foot in his mouth. He probably literally meant that. But now, how does that affect the president? And/or is this reading the tea leaves of what we've even discussed here before about ultimately Biden not being the vice presidential candidate this time around in lieu of a Hillary or something? Because for the vice president to make a comment like that, does he just not want the job?
It's possible. I mean, in some ways, you got to look at there's really only two kind of people that would want to be vice president. Somebody who is at the end of their career, maybe never really wanted to be president, wants to sort of cap a career, wants to be able to help, to do what they can do. A Dick Cheney is the type.
Nelson Rockefeller,
right. Then you've got a Rick Santorum, for example, who is young, who's doing it because he wants to be president. And, it's that stepping stone to the presidency. Joe Biden's certainly not the latter. Is he the former? He's not really somebody that strikes me as the elder statesman type. Any other candidate, I would say it could possibly be an...
But yet Biden could certainly jump right into the job if need be. He's certainly qualified.
I mean, I don't really think so. But,
I do. I think he's qualified. You can't be around in, Senate and Congress and everything for as many years as somebody like he has been and not be qualified. I always look back to somebody like Dick Gephardt. Just like some of these football teams, like they used to say about the Denver Broncos or the Buffalo Bills, they always make it to the Super Bowl, but they don't win the Super Bowl. That was right. Dick Gephardt, ran and ran and ran and ran, and he was in Congress forever, but he just couldn't make it to the presidency.
Couldn't pull it off, right.
And so he was, not to say he wasn't qualified then. He had all of those years in Congress.
Right.
Biden's been around forever, so, qualification is qualification.
They what is it they say? People always get promoted to one level above their competency.
Yeah.
But you're right. He's somebody who understands Washington. In an emergency, he could probably take over. And, again, I still just think he's an idiot. Let me rephrase it this way. It's certainly possible, because that's how you would start something like that, where you want to start showing a distance between the president and the...
Have the vice president put his foot in his mouth.
Exactly, which the problem is Joe Biden does that all the time, and it's a regular Joe Biden thing, so it might just get lost in the news cycle where it's, Joe Biden said something stupid. He always does that.
Well, this has no legs. I heard one mention of this, and actually the discussion that I've heard on this was... other internet shows like ours. It's not something that mainstream media has picked up on.
Right. So I think I saw it as a brief blip, and I might have picked it up on either Fox or CNN, but it was there and then it was gone. Like it was one of those minor stories that didn't matter. So it's possible that the White House put it out there for that reason. And when I say things like that the White House put a story out there like that to start showing a distance between the president and the vice president. So if Joe Biden wanted to move on, it looked more legitimate. I'm not accusing them of being evil or Machiavellian. I would do the same thing if I was them, and that's what I wanted to achieve. You know, to an extent, that's politics. That's how you've got to play the
Oh,
game.
it's almost like asking somebody to resign or put the weight on their shoulders as opposed to firing them.
Right, absolutely. So I'm not trying to fault them in any way for that. It's possible that they put it out there and it didn't get enough reaction, or they put it out there as a story that can come back in 6 or 7 months and say, "Oh, well, you remember when he said this? You know, that's indicative of problems they had a year before this." And one of the other things that I almost wouldn't be surprised if Joe Biden was willing to be, sort of a sacrificial lamb in the sense that, he could say, "Well, I really disagree with the president on these policies. I'm going to leave." In comes Hillary, helps Obama win the election. 6 months after the election, Biden says, "Well, we sort of just did it to win the election." He won't come out that open and say it, but then everyone will be like, "Oh, all right, we understand that," and the country will move on from then.
I think everybody already realizes that anyway.
Well, yeah, I think
that that if Biden's gone, or even if Hillary and Biden swap jobs, as we have discussed in the past, people see that coming and they know the reason behind it.
Right, which is one of the reasons that makes me think it wouldn't be. I mean, as tantalizing as that would be from again a political theater point perspective. I don't.
Oh, that's a great October surprise. I mean, not that it could be literally an October surprise because the convention's in August. Not to say that you can't make a change after the convention.
It absolutely could be.
But what a great October surprise!
I'll have to reread the Constitution, but I believe that you don't necessarily have to. Whoever's third to take over, which is the Speaker of the House.
Yeah, well, but then as far as the convention and everything, remember McGovern. His first choice was Eagleton, and then it turned out that Eagleton had like a nervous breakdown or something, and he dropped Eagleton and went with Sergeant Shriver.
Right, he could pick Joe Biden at the convention, and then October 15th, Joe Biden says, "I've got a freaking heart disease" or something like that.
That's what I'm saying. That's what happened with McGovern, exactly. With Eagleton and then Shriver.
But get this, he steps down, and Obama says, "Well, to fill the role of vice president for the next 6 weeks or whatever it is, I'm picking Hillary Clinton." Doesn't say anything about who is part whatever. She becomes the vice president, and you go from there. I mean, it could happen that fast that Hillary could theoretically become vice president before the election. Oh, you know what I'm saying? If they phrase it as Joe Biden.
Well, it's my remembrance that the president does appoint a new vice president if the vice president drops out.
Yes, that's
thinking back to Spiro Agnew.
Right.
When he resigned, Nixon appointed Ford as the new vice president.
Right. I believe the chain of command, and this is why I said I want to check. I believe that only is in the event that both the president and the vice president are
right. Right, but if the vice president resigns, the president names a new vice president.
Right, because correct me if I'm wrong, was Jerry Ford still Speaker of the House, or was he vice president when Nixon resigned?
Yeah, he was vice president already.
Okay, right.
Nixon made him his vice president after Agnew resigned.
Right, and I'm going to throw this little curveball in there. I believe all that's required is Senate confirmation. Somebody can feel free to fact check me on that. I highly suspect that the Democrats in the Senate at the 11th hour would be willing to approve Hillary Clinton as vice president. I could be wrong. And even though we all realize it's being done for politics, picking the Secretary of State as vice president, especially if there's problems with Iran and if that's a very tense situation, or God forbid we're involved in a war with them, that does make sense, actually. We know they're doing it for politics, but God forbid something happens to your vice president. Well, we need somebody right in here who knows what's going on with this situation, who can step right up.
Well, I'm going to play liberal view, since on ViewPoint, even though we were always supposed to have a liberal view after you lost your original co-host, we seem to have lost the liberal view. I'm going to go out on a limb and say if that is the October surprise, Obama just got himself reelected. That would guarantee him the election, in my opinion, by bringing on Hillary as vice president.
I'll cautiously agree with that. It depends, because if it happens it would have to happen close to the election. And there's a risk with that, because if it happens close enough that all of a sudden they're getting all the media coverage, that's all that everyone's talking about, there's all that hype that's getting built up, riding up right up to the election, you're right, that is going to be something that knocks the Republicans off their balance. But I still think there could potentially be backlash, because that'll energize his base, I think, but a lot of moderates, I don't think they're that thrilled with Obama, and I think that's where it could happen. But it depends on how late.
They love Hillary, though. That's the point.
That's true, but I don't know if they love her enough to want to vote for Obama again. And I could be wrong, but it would have to happen close enough that the momentum just carries them through. And it very well might. Again, this could happen, October 15th, and then, oh, yep, Hillary's going to be the vice president. And before the Republicans...
Well, the polls right now, Gingrich is well behind Obama in the head-to-head. He's almost 20 points, I believe, behind Obama in the head-to-head. Romney and Obama are in a virtual tie. Mm-hmm. That's with Biden. Now, if you throw Hillary into there as opposed to Biden, I think you just tilted the table.
It's a very good possibility. I'm worried that people are going to see it as politics and see it for what it is and still not want to necessarily go for them. But again, the economy is still, I think, there, and Iran is still there as an issue. If 6 months from now the economy has upticked, certainly. If 6 months from now we see, a collapse in Europe and we see, problems over here from that, I don't think it's going to be enough. But I also don't think it's something that they should do now. I think doing it now, they'll get a bump from it. It's almost like a post-convention bump. Each candidate...
Oh, no, that would have to be a literal October surprise.
Yeah, absolutely, because I think doing it before that, it's not going to happen. And October makes sense because it's after the conventions. September leads into October. People have started to make up their minds, and then, bam, you hit them. But it's got to be fast enough that, people still can matter. Again, Joe Biden could resign 3 days before the election, and the president could say, well, he's on the ballot with me, but I intend to replace him with Hillary Clinton. Do you know what I mean? So, I mean, they do have a very wide window that they could accomplish this in. I'm still not 100% sure it's going to happen, only because Hillary is really banking her entire career on it. If, hypothetically, Obama were to win, again, without Hillary, with Biden, let's say.
Well, Hillary's gone. I tend to take her for her word that come January of 2013, she's out of politics.
I absolutely think she would be, but she could come back in 4 years as the Democratic nominee because it's not going to be Biden. He'll probably be too old at that point. I'd be very surprised. Not too old, but I don't think he's not interested. Yeah, and I don't know who the Democrats really have. Exactly, and that could be it. It could be, we had 8 years of Obama, and now, Hillary's in there. So that's a possibility. If Romney wins, is she going to want to challenge him in 4 years?
No, and then you have all of those very potentially strong Republicans, the Chris Christies and all of that, and the Rubios, Rubios, etc. So forget it.
Right. So I don't think she'll. But if she does it, she's banking her career on it because if they do it, and Obama loses, she's done. And it's almost that she ends her career. And again, it's a risk, and that's what she's going to do. And a lot of times, that's what politics is. She ends a career now as a almost presidential candidate on the Democrat side and in a good Secretary of State. I'll give her credit. I think she's done well in the position she's in. That's how she ends her career, and that's sort of her.
That's fine. It's on an upswing.
Absolutely. If she runs and becomes president, obviously that's the best upswing.
Right.
But if she runs as his running mate and then he loses, her career is sort of forever tainted with, oh, remember how great Hillary Clinton was, and then she couldn't pull the trigger. In the end.
Sure, because I would think that, let's assume we're talking about Romney, I would say it's almost safe to assume that Romney would, unless he walks away from it like he did in Massachusetts, he would probably be a 2-term president. And then, you have at that point a 58-year-old Chris Christie, a Rubio who is still then at that point maybe in his 40s or something. So, in 2020, you're looking at a very powerful Republican field.
Right, and I mean Hillary at that point I think would be
she'll well into her 70s, right?
Although Ed, would you know? And I'm not sure off the top of my head how old Margaret Thatcher was when she was elected.
Early 70s.
Early 70s.
And I joke about Ron Paul. Ron Paul being 78 or whatever he is doesn't have an effect to me. If I really found myself in a position of 100% believing in Ron Paul, I would vote for him. I would not vote for him just because he's 78 years old.
Right. Well, you know what's interesting? Ron Paul, they said at the last debate, they talked about health records, and he's very private, didn't want to really release his, but he said, I challenge the others to.
Yeah, he said, I'll ride 25 miles in Texas heat.
Yeah, exactly. And, I would say that because he's fit and he's active, he's probably in far, far better health than Gingrich.
Yeah, I would think.
Right. I don't think Ron Paul would, suffer a stroke and then, something happen to him. I'd be worried to an extent that Gingrich.
More with Gingrich, yes.
Yeah, he's in his late 60s. He's, he's put on quite a bit of weight, never really lost it. So
no, he looks at least 50 pounds overweight.
Probably, I would say even probably more than that. But I think Gingrich has the potential to be in much, much worse health than the others. Mitt Romney, God bless him, he's a Mormon. He doesn't drink caffeine, doesn't drink alcohol. He's probably going to live to 140. But you're right. I think Ron Paul doesn't look. I mean, he looks his age, but he's a spry 76-year-old. And you're right. Let me take a quick look here. Margaret Thatcher was born in 1925. She was so she was actually 54.
There you go. Yeah, because she
became prime minister in 1979, so she was 54, served for 11. Also, she was 65 by the time she left.
Okay, there you go.
You know what? She's a generation before Hillary.
Yeah.
Hillary Clinton is currently, if you want to hold on 1 second, I can look it up. I think is it 64?
Yeah, she's, yep. I believe she was born right at the end of World War II or so.
Yep, so she's 64. She's a baby boomer. So currently at 64, if she were to have to wait 8 years, I mean, she'd be 72, 73.
Still younger than Ron Paul is now.
Still younger than Ron Paul is. I believe she'd be right around only a couple of years older than Ronald Reagan when he was elected.
Right. Yeah.
And she might take on that Thatcher-esque, older lady that, we're more willing to listen to. I know that sounds terrible, but I think Margaret Thatcher came off more grandmotherly. And,
even in her 50s, right. That's why we assumed she was older.
Right, and I think that, I guess I'll recant what I said earlier. I don't necessarily think that Hillary's career would be over if she were to lose, if she ran with him, but it would be much more difficult for her to come back in, 15 or 20 years or whatever it happens to be, 12 years, sorry, rather.
I still think, barring an October surprise, I think she's out of politics, though. I think, they're so involved in their charities and their Clinton Foundation and everything. Chelsea is involved in that. I think Chelsea's like even the president of the foundation or something.
Right.
I think Chelsea runs the foundation.
I'll give everyone a little factoid here. Whenever you have a speaker at whether it's a college or a university or a corporate meeting or whatever, they get paid big bucks for those. And I'm talking people you wouldn't think would be worth it get paid a lot of money.
Clinton gets 50 grand or something?
No, it's more. The average speaking fee for Bill Clinton's closer to 200 grand.
Oh, okay.
He will charge less. I mean, obviously, if a community college in Ohio,
they'll get him for 50 grand.
They'll get him cheaper. But I mean, the people that have the money, he's getting paid a lot of money. So she's also too. It could make sense that she's at a point in her career where she can travel the world. A lot of it'll be free travel. She can speak here and there for hundreds of thousands of dollars at a time, make all this money for her charity. She could take on a Jimmy Carter-esque role where it's we're sending Hillary Clinton to negotiate with person X or to do this. I hope she wouldn't be as far out there as Jimmy Carter sometimes is. God bless him for trying, but she could definitely still have a really phenomenal career outside of politics. I would agree with you that short of maybe one final presidential run, Hillary's not going to run for governor anywhere. She's not going to run for senator. She's not going to have any other cabinet positions. I would say that barring a 2020 run or so, I think that would happen. Again, if let's say hypothetically Romney were to be elected, something terrible happened and the world hated him and you knew whoever the Democrat was going to win was going to be him.
Or he walks away after 4 years like he's known to do.
Right. Yeah, just to give everyone a background lesson here, in Massachusetts, Mitt Romney was governor for 4 years and came to the end of his term, started running for president, walked right away from the state, and, oh, God, what was her name? I'm forgetting it now.
Swift.
No, it wasn't Swift. It was
Oh, no, because Swift was lieutenant governor.
Placed Swift, who was terrible. I cannot. Carrie Healy.
Yeah.
I believe that was it. And she was just left in the dust, and Mitt Romney pretended he wasn't even from Massachusetts, didn't know her. And she lost pretty handily to Deval Patrick, which I actually, despite politically disagreeing with Governor Patrick in Massachusetts, I do like him quite a bit, and I have a lot of respect for him. But he could walk away after 4 years. I don't think he would, because what else is he going to do after this? I mean, go be president of the Mormon Church or something. No offense to Mormons. I don't know what, their actual religious structure is there. King Mormon or something. See, now you got me making fun of a guy I like. That's just...
You've alienated about 51 out of our 50 states, and now you're picking on the religious organizations.
Right, which is sad, because, I like...
Well, you know what? I hope your show ends up getting about 2 listeners, and one of them may not be me.
Ed, when I listen to my own show 50 or 60 times a day, that counts as 50 or 60 listens, so we'll get them there one way or the other. But no intention to slight the Mormons. But I think that I'd be surprised if Romney were to walk away after one term, just because there's no other office in sight, so to speak.
Right.
Whether that happens, we'll have to wait to see. Florida is now over. I can remember just a few weeks ago, before any of the primaries, talking about what was going to happen, what was going to go on, and now we're done with Florida. We're moving on to Nevada and the other states. We are just over a month away, almost less than a month if you don't want to consider February a real month because it's only got 28 days. So see, now I'm insulting the months. Super Tuesday is usually at the point when it's pretty much a wrap-up. We'll have to wait and see. But we here at ViewPoint are going to continue to bring you the best news and opinion that we can bring you and the best insight that we can bring you. And we're going to continue our format of focusing sometimes on the news and what's going on out there and sometimes on the election, depending on the volume for whichever one is more prominent. Obviously, we covered South Carolina. We covered the briefly in the Florida primary. Next week's episode, we are likely to cover a combination of news and the election. But that being said, Ed, did you have anything else you wanted to add to the discussion?
I think we're just about wrapped up, and hopefully we could do some big coverage on Super Tuesday.
Keep listening to BaseNet Internet Television. We're at basenettv.com, basenettv.com, and keep checking out ViewPoint. And next week's episode will be up to you with a mix of our news and opinion. And keep listening.